We Can Do It, the story of Rosie the Riveter. Rosie the Riveter was a cultural icon used in propaganda campaigns by the United States government with the goal of influencing women to join the workforce, as well as the war effort during World War II. During World War II, Rosie the Riveter became the symbol of working women, empowering and influencing them to claim their places in the workforce. Thus, the traditional American household was forever altered. Before World War II, the man of the home worked to support his family, and the woman stayed home to care for the home and children. Some women were a part of the workforce before the war, but they were generally just immigrants and lower-class citizens. The home was a protected place before World War II. Families decided what information, ideas, and people entered their homes. The bombing of Pearl Harbor, Hawaii on December 7, 1941 dragged America into the Second World War and brought about many emotional responses. The first reaction to the bombing of Pearl Harbor was a sudden increase in marriages, so that couples could be married before the husband would be sent off to war. During the days immediately after America joined World War II, the Cook County, Illinois clerk issued marriage licenses at 2 times the typical rate. The women with husbands at war, particularly the wives with no children, who married shortly after America joined the World War, were referred to as war brides. The almost immediate departure of their husbands into the military delayed the creation of a traditional household, which created problems to the war brides. Childless war brides were encouraged to join the workforce and become a part of the war effort, which many did. However, the concept of Rosie the Riveter and women working didn't happen all at once. The creation of Chicago's Rosie the Riveter came in stages. Chicago had a low demand for female workers at the beginning of World War II, because when the war first began, most Chicago men took second jobs and increased work hours to contribute to the war effort and bring home more money. During the war, there was a higher demand for factory workers because America needed war supplies. Many factory positions were left empty because the men that once filled them prior to World War II abandoned their jobs for the military. After the war began, there was so much propaganda and war talk that it was hard to avoid. The home was no longer protected. The media compromised the living space by controlling the information and ideas that entered the home in the 1940s. In order to meet the demand of factory workers needed, the American government used propaganda campaigns as a way to influence women to claim their places in the workforce. One of the most popular, successful, and well-known government campaigns aimed at women during World War II was Rosie the Riveter. Rosie was a feminine, loyal, patriotic, smart, strong, pretty, and efficient woman. She was created in a way that would make women want to emulate her. She was a fictional character, a cultural icon, a symbol of feminism and patriotism, as well as a role model for all working women during World War II. Some even called her the homefront equivalent of G.I. Joe. The term Rosie the Riveter was first used in 1942 in the popular song Rosie the Riveter by the Four Vagabonds. The lyrics speak about how patriotic and hardworking she is and tells the story of the life of a common war bride. The melody made Americans fall in love with the image of Rosie the Riveter. The first popular image of Rosie the Riveter was Norman Rockwell's depiction of the strong, patriotic woman who looked ready to work. The image first appeared on the cover of the Saturday Evening Post on May 29, 1943. The most iconic depiction of Rosie the Riveter was created in 1942 by J. Howard Miller. The artwork was modeled after a photograph of Geraldine Doyle, a factory worker during World War II. The poster kept the image of Rosie the Riveter alive, and it is still recognized by Americans today. Rosie and her concept were so iconic that women in the workforce during World War II, particularly working in factories, were and are still often referred to as Rosies. Rosie expressed the economic power of women. She also influenced women to become a part of the workforce by expressing influential messages such as, "We can do it," and stressing the political need for women to join the workforce. She was one of the most successful recruitment tools in United States history. Rosie commonly produced war supplies, specifically aircraft parts, which responded to the need for factory workers. She was usually depicted as a riveter in an aircraft factory, hence the name, Rosie the Riveter. The Douglas Aircraft Company, the Corporation of Army Engineers, the Civil Aeronautics Authority, the Chicago Association of Commerce, and the Chicago Regional Planning Association wanted to increase the production of airplanes during World War II, so they chose a location on the northwest side of Chicago, which they believed would be less likely to be bombed by enemy planes. Chicago had many Rosies with many stories. The first C-4 Skymaster was made on July 30th, 1943, and completed by Chicago's Rosie the Riveter, Jenny Jean Grayco. She named it Chicago. It is obvious that Rosie was a huge influence to women between the years of 1942 and 1945, because the aviation industry saw the largest increase in female employees. Based on a survey taken in 1943, more than 310,000 women worked in the U.S. aircraft industry. Prior to World War II, only 1% of the aviation industry's workforce was composed of women. But by the end of World War II, women made up 65% of the United States aircraft industry's workforce. It is evident that Rosie the Riveter was a role model to the 18 million females in the workforce during World War II. Rosie had a huge impact on women. She was their role model. Women wanted to be just like her, and that meant having the same job as her too. Working helped to create a new self-image for women, which made them feel important, equal, and capable of doing a man's work. The new self-image empowered women. Because of the labor shortage, Chicago employers intensified their calls for female employees and began hiring single and married women. While women were prepared to accept their call into the workforce, their new roles still had limitations. The American government needed the help of women, and they were recruiting women to join the workforce. But they discouraged women with children under the age of 14 from getting jobs because they feared that a rise in working mothers would result in a rise of juvenile delinquents. Many mothers who did work during World War II had child care issues. Unlike men, women worked double shifts. Not only did they have to work all day, but they also had to go home and care for the house and family. The government was in such a desperate need for help that they went so far as to recruit women to join the workforce right out of high school. The government's call for help was answered. Some women had such a huge desire to work and become a part of the war effort that they lied about their age. Because of Rosie the Riveter, there were more than 18 million women in the workforce by 1944. More than 2.3 million women worked in the United States war industries. As more women entered the workforce, the attitudes towards them changed. After a while, the once conformed and traditional citizens that did not accept the new lifestyles of women learned to accept the temporary changes of wives and mothers in the workforce due to the war. Not only were women persuaded to become a part of the workforce, but they were also empowered and influenced to become a part of the military. Of course, many women were nurses in the military during World War II, but there were 100,000 women in the Women's Auxiliary Army, where they completed non-combat tasks that could be done better by females rather than male soldiers. There were 11,000 female Coast Guards during World War II, and 1,800 female Marines. 86,000 women were also accepted to the Volunteer Emergency Service during World War II. Dorothy Chambers, a wave during the Second World War, said, "We girls in our 20s mostly learned to make the vital weather observations that the pilots depended on. Mere girls decided when planes could take off." Waves like Dorothy Chambers were a vital element to the war, and even though they didn't work in factories, they were influenced by propaganda campaigns, just like Rosie's. After World War II ended, many women wanted to continue working. Most of the women that did stay in the workforce were put in a lower-paying job position so men could have the better jobs. The changes of society's opinion of women in the workforce during World War II were superficial and temporary. After World War II ended, women in the workforce were again looked down upon by society. Most women no longer wanted to work after the war, so they returned to caring for their families full-time. Even though the amount of women in the workforce decreased after World War II, and it was no longer socially acceptable for women to work, the ideas and beliefs of women's equality filtered into future movements. The road that was taken by women during World War II continued into the future, and paved a path for women. If it had not been for Rosie the Riveter and all the Rosies during World War II, women would not have the job positions they are in today.
All the day long, whether rain or shine, she's a part of the assembly line. She's making history, working for victory. Rosie the Riveter keeps a sharp lookout for sabotage, sitting up there on the fuselage. That little frail can do more than a male can do. Rosie the Riveter, Rosie's got a boyfriend.